Welcome, welcome everybody. How's it going? David here. With Left Reckoning's Griscom stream for this week. I hope everybody enjoyed our show with Emma Vigland on Tuesday. It was a hell of a lot of fun to have her hanging out with us, and we certainly need to be doing that again sometime in the future. A couple quick things. Happy to be taking some questions. I don't know if this will be a super long one because I got some stuff I'm finishing up still. Look forward this Sunday, patrons. I've been almost finished with this video essay I've been working on for a little bit. Something that, if I'm being completely honest, I've been thinking about and trying to convey on some level through these streams for the past couple years, just sort of investigating what that moment of, both Bernie in 2016 and in 2020 meant. This kind of concept of left populism, which is a little bit of a fuzzy and squishy topic and conception. So, breaking down a little bit of that, but just sort of talking about what that moment meant, what the lessons were, and how we can start building something a little bit different. And I'll be relying heavily on some of the lessons from the great Leo Panitch to be making that point. So that'll be coming out this Sunday for patrons at Left Reckoning, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. And hopefully, I know I keep teasing it, but I'm pretty sure we'll be set to ship out orders on some of this Left Reckoning merch, both the shirts and the hats, pretty soon. So I'm hoping next Tuesday, if not the day after. But yeah, y'all, there's a couple of little bits of stories I'd like to get to. If folks have any questions or anything you'd like to hear me get into, feel free to jump those into the chat. Folks who aren't familiar, these are a little bit more relaxed. We take questions, unlike the main show where it's just kind of set schedule. And we got some fun stuff coming up the next couple of weeks. I think we're going to be doing a deep dive into Montana soon, helping people understand the history and the politics of that state, along with hopefully doing a Brazil recap very soon, amongst many, many other things. So keep your eye out for what we're doing over here at Left Reckoning. But maybe to start, and again, feel free to jump into chat with any questions too, but I'll talk about this to open up. I wanted to talk a little bit about Kansas. So we talked about that in the main show on Tuesday night as those results were coming in. So we were sort of doing a segment on the beforehand, and we were focusing on the really dirty way that the right was running that campaign. And I made the point, with Matt and Emma that, this isn't unique to that Kansas run. That is something that the Republican Party is very happy to be doing. They have been using very duplicitous means, not just in their campaigning, but just look at the way that Kansas effectively opening up the door for an abortion ban in that state was written. It was extremely confusing. The fact, too, that we didn't mention on the show is it's notable that this was held in a primary that was a lot more consequential for the Republicans. So the idea was to hold it in a low turnout election where there would be mainly Republican voters going to the polls. So, basic anti-democracy tactics. But as folks know at this point, overwhelmingly, Kansans got together and they say, no, we do not support an opening of the door for an abortion ban. And I want to talk about it a little bit. One, because fuck yeah, that's something that's worth celebrating. And two, because it's been really frustrating to see the post Kansas media narrative here, wherein the fact that so many Kansans in a quote unquote red state, which is terminology again I really don't like to use because I think it really obscures politics and most importantly working class politics in this country when you're just thinking about things, Democrats versus Republicans, because in the absence of any kind of real class formation party system, the reasons that people go one way or the other oftentimes has much more to do, at least in the sense of like normal people, working class people, where they're voting, has much more to do with historical, geographical, and cultural issues that sort of create these party formations. I don't think, frankly, that your average Democratic Party voter in, let's say, New York State is too different, actually, in a lot of ways from your average Republican voter. Now, they might get worked up about different things because that's what's being fed to them. But when it comes to these kind of basic questions, like basic human rights, healthcare, do you hate the boss? There's a lot of common ground there. And I'm not saying that it's insignificant, the kind of current like political geography in this country. But the way that this victory has sort of been framed, I think, is a little bit unhelpful, because effectively what you're seeing if you watch MSNBC or, reading opinion pieces in the New York Times is Kansas delivers a huge win to the Democratic Party. And I don't find that to be very convincing, because it wasn't like the Democratic Party themselves were delivering that win. It's not like people were showing up in that moment and voting for Democratic Party candidates. And if you've looked at the way that the National Democratic Party has handled the fallout since the overturning of Roe v. Wade in this country, I mean, what would you be showing up for? Now, what the framing should be is across the board in this country, most Americans, most people do support abortion rights in some form or another. Now, there's debate about where and when, and those debates are important and they're important to be fought out. But I think this kind of fantasy that a lot of people have, um, that abortion is not something that is popular, it's not a right that people want to see protected, was shown really, really to be wrong in Kansas. And I always remind folks, when you look at polling, opinion polling, even in states like Texas, again, another quote unquote red state, you see that similar kind of dynamic where, while the Republican Party is running as far to the right on this issue as possible, the everyday people don't support these kind of draconian, really nasty anti-human abortion bans. The Republican Party is very happy to run on a minoritarian, policy here. And now there's certainly openings made for the Democratic Party to take advantage of that, which they won't and they haven't, because their coalition, the people that they're trying to maintain and build up their reputation, aren't all people who are friendly to basic human rights. So the point here is that when it comes down to these questions that seemingly, like, truly seem like they divide and dominate American politics, there's actually much more consensus than you would think amongst everyday American people. And it just is a kind of a very clear window, I think, this chapter into the possibility for building a different kind of politics in this country. Now, of course, it's always going to be framed by people in the national media as this kind of red versus blue kind of dynamic, which I think really obscures the fundamental reality about a lot of the nature of, like, the average American, the American working class as a whole, that I think is extremely damaging for politics. So we'll see. I mean, I think that this is a very encouraging sign. There's going to be more votes coming up in a few states. I know California, Kentucky, Montana, and Vermont all have effectively ballot initiatives or constitutional amendment votes coming up on this. So we'll see what happens when this gets brought to the people. It also brings up one last thing before I roll through some of these questions from y'all. It shows that when you take these questions to the people, we have the opportunity to get better results. I always point to what is happening in Idaho with Reclaim Idaho, which is taking questions to everyday people. Now, of course, that's another state, quote unquote, red state. People vote one way for certain candidates, but when you put questions to them, like, do you think that Medicaid should be expanded to people? People say, yeah, I do. Now, the Republican Party won't deliver that to them. But when you bring them that question on a ballot initiative, then you can really start getting things cooking. You got the same kind of things when it comes to funding education in this country. And the success in Idaho on these ballot initiatives, I think, is a really encouraging sign for a different way to think about doing kind of popular democratic politics in this country. And I'm talking about democratic as in the sense of, like, democracy, not in the sense of the party. That I think really should open up a lot of doors and open up people to a lot of different kind of strategies for building a real kind of coalition that is not so tied, for whatever reason, to these, more toxic brands, let's say, of, like, the Democratic Party for folks, but is actually really rooted in building up working class power, people power, and building, like, a thriving democracy. So a lot to celebrate in Kansas, I think. And I think it should be something that people find to be really encouraging. But I also think it's really important to draw the right lessons of this, because almost every bit of the analysis that we saw post Kansas, or at least what I was reading, was only framing this in the midterms. And I think that that's a bit of a mistake. It shows where a lot of people's heads are at when they're thinking about things like this, when that's, like, the first lesson that they want to draw out of it. So The point here is that abortion rights are very popular in this country. The Democratic Party should not shy away from them as much as they had. But this is not a show that's really interested in giving free advice to that party. Um, I think it's important for us to remember where we stand as a country and be able to make the argument that what's being done by the right now, what's being done by the Republican Party and the undemocratic Supreme Court is really not only an affront in the general sense to principles of like basic human dignity and human rights, but it's also an affront to the American people who feel a very certain way about this issue, actually, that is always sort of filtered out when people sort of pay a little bit too much attention to Democrats versus Republicans, because a whole host of things go into the way that people vote or don't vote, which again is the largest block in this country. And if we're trying to build movements that can win and make sure that we're not seeing rights being curtailed and pulled back, I think understanding what the actual map looks like is something that's really important. I'll be happy to, hear what y'all are saying in here. I'm going to go up a little bit. Tripod says, "Can you make the Griscom stream music chopped and screwed?" I don't know what that means, friend. Sorry. Straw McCallum says, "Have you seen the thing about the Clyburns and Haleys profiting off of the Catawba Nations casino?" No, I haven't, but I can't imagine that it's a good thing when you see those two different groups coming together. I'd love to hear more about it. We always love when people are tuning in from work. Thanks very much, the artist, for jumping in. Yeah, and this has been a disgusting little bit here. Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittany Griner, which is horrific that they're going to be putting her in prison. It's been cowardly to see how weak Biden has actually been on that international incident. And as Billy Big Brick says here, Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittany Griner, president of the country, with hundreds of people in prison for the rest of their lives on pot charges. Yeah, the hypocrisy is very clear there. Let's see, y'all. Daniel says abortion is a working class issue. It's time we framed it as such. Yeah, it's just something that I think there's a much more consensus on than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And the fact is that the Republican Party is very willing to run this kind of bullshit minoritarian policy, which doesn't even speak even to their own voting base, which is pretty insane to think about. In the spirit of John Brown, Prairie Fire says, "You can always count on the people of Kansas to do the right thing after considering all other options." Well, let's see. The artist has a question about what is abolish the Senate. What does that mean? Well, I mean, the argument for that is that the Senate is like the least democratic elected body that we have in this country. A little bit more democratic, at least in the sense that you get to vote for it, than the Supreme Court, which we should also do away with. But the Senate was a system that was set up not to promote the voices of people, but to promote primarily the interests of both slavery and large industry against the people, because the people who founded this country were very, very worried about what they called the masses or the mob, right? And the Senate, I mean, for a long time, we didn't even have popular election of the Senate. That was a reform that people fought tooth and nail for. And I don't think that there's any real argument for why states in and of themselves should be having representation when we should be representing people. I think it's a very clear-cut argument. I think the more interesting questions on that is like, how can you build a movement that has the capacity to deliver that? And, just like in the same way that when we moved to more popular selection of senators, those came from movements of people who were uniting on a whole host of issues and recognized that this was a system that was standing directly in their way. So I don't think that you can build a popular coalition just on like straight up, constitutional reform in and of itself. You have to have a movement that's built around things that are a little bit closer to people's everyday life, and then have them sort of see through the practical experience of doing politics that this is a system that's against them, to be able to leverage that mobilization there. Um, Jay says, "Hey David, I sent a message to the Left Reckon Patreon about a potential segment on what a democratic socialist approach to feminism and serious gender rights would look like." Well, I mean, I'd be happy to explore that. I mean, there's working groups that are dedicated specifically to that. Um, I mean, the most broad answer that I could give you on this is that, these are fundamentally um, working class rights. And how do I mean that? Well, power and money in this society give people a whole host of privileges that aren't enjoyed by everyday working people. So when it comes to things like, gender equality, when it comes to things like abortion rights, um, building up popular movements that demand these rights that we all sort of understand, deep down, to be basic human rights, then that should be realized. That really, the systems that are preventing us from realizing those and putting those into practice are the interests of concentrated power and capital. So I think that that's like the intervention of like the socialist worldview into those kind of arguments. But I would love to do a longer segment on that. I have a bunch of guests I can think of right now who'd be great to do something with that. So I think that's a great suggestion, and I really appreciate the chat, friend. Um, the Biden presidency has been alienating. I've went from having many allies to most now just call me a tanky or a Trumper in today's discourse. I mean, it's a shame. I mean, it shows. I mean, I don't know if people remember these things. It wasn't that long ago, but it's always amazing when we're going into an election. There's no criticism allowed because we have to focus on winning the election, and then somebody comes to power. We're not allowed to criticize anymore. It's very obvious why. It's because they want to find ways to prevent and block out any kind of criticism. But that's why it's great that we have, networks like this and communities like this where we can start to build our own kind of coherent and united voice on these kind of things, because you're not going to get that, from more traditional media, because it's not even that it's just like set up to sort of block those things out. It's the hoops and what you have to go through to get into those positions fundamentally changes the way I think that you think about the world and politics. Um, yeah, I mean that shit sucks, and it's really depressing that they're just going to continue to rely on this idea that if we just point out how bad the Republican Party is, that's going to be a winning strategy, because we're seeing that that's not really the case. um, Daredevil says, totally agree with David. There's no need for a Senate, a federal representation of states. We have a state and local governments to take care of localities. House of Representatives should have more numbers. Totally agree. All right, let's see. I've not seen this, but Sean Harper says, "Hey David, don't know if you've come across this, but the Irish president's wife recently called for peace negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Sensible enough. I think it's mighty sensible, and I could imagine there's a lot of people who are very mad about that, because they like having the theater of it, despite the fact that this is costing tremendous pain and human suffering for folks. All conflicts end at the negotiating table, and I think it's the most sensible thing that you can do, especially from the outside, to try to find ways to end the hostilities and end the war. It's really tremendously disheartening, actually, to see how controversial that argument has been treated for a little while now. Well, welcome to your free time, Evan. Says, ahoy, folks. Just finished working for the man. Always happy to have y'all checking in from us. Well, I think I'm gonna have to run in a second. I'm sorry. I know these usually go a lot longer, but I'm a little crunched for time today. I can maybe take one or two more questions if anyone has any. Just reminding folks that starting next week, we're going to be doing a bi-monthly cross-streamed like joint show with our friends at This Is Revolution podcast. So the first one will be next Thursday evening. What would that be? Um, Thursday the 11th. So keep your eye out for that. I'm really stoked to be doing more with those good folks over there. It's gonna be fun to be able to check in with those guys more frequently. So we'll be doing those on Thursday evenings. Unless the Cowboys are playing, then we'll figure out another time to do it. Damn, is there anything else I want to put out there? Damn, I think that might be. I think that might be it. So keep your eye out. So I'm gonna go and I got to finish this piece for y'all. It's gonna be out on Sunday on the history of a quick history of the Bernie and Corbyn movements, sort of investigating what this kind of politics was, which was really trying to reintroduce and rebuild a class and movement politics, sort of from the top down, in the sense of like going through major structures like the Labor Party, and in Bernie Sanders' case, through Democratic Party primaries, and seeing where that was successful and where we really need to be building something different if we want to be winning and building an actual working class politics. I'll be borrowing heavily from Leo Pan, show I highly suggest all of y'all read. Okay, two more I'll get to. Strom says, what do you think about starting organizing efforts in small industrial cities like Hartsville, South Carolina? I mean, I think that that's really excellent. I think a lot of those parts of the country are really ignored nationally. I think that, speaking to people's issues in a way that's tangible for them is the way to be going. So, if you're getting anything like that going, let us know. We'll be happy to cover it on the program. Radish says they have Do I Rock Vinyl? I might have a cool cosmic country folk progressive album to send y'all soon. Hell yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that. We do. We have a PO box. I haven't put that out yet, but we finally got a PO box set up so people can send us stuff. I'll put it up on the Patreon later, and I'll put it in the YouTube sometime in the next few days. So keep your eye out for that. I will be looking forward to hearing that album, friend. Well, anyways, folks, sorry this was a little shorter than normal, but I got to run. I'll see everybody next Tuesday, 7 Central, and we'll see patrons this Sunday in the afternoon. Until then, everybody, take care and talk to you soon.